All right, Hobbs Middle School Civics. Here we go, Chapter 8, Lesson 3, Making Foreign Policy. First, what is foreign policy? Easiest way to answer that is break the term down. Foreign means different. Foreign is any country other than the United States. So those other 195 countries out there that aren't the United States are foreign countries. Policies are plans. So foreign policy is the nation's plans for dealing with 195 other countries in the world. So, what is the president who's ultimately responsible for foreign policy trying to achieve with our foreign policy? Number one, and most important, is national security. Our foreign policy plans have one number one goal is to make sure the United States is safe and secure. Hopefully that makes sense. If your country isn't safe and secure, nothing else is going to matter. If Russian or Chinese tanks are rolling down the streets in downtown Milton, you're really not going to be worrying about health care. You're not going to be worrying about fixing bridges. You're not going to be worried about building a new airport. You're going to worry about, gee, we got Russian and Chinese military in our country. We need to fix that problem first. Close on the heels, though, of national security is the idea that we use foreign policy to build foreign trade. We want to be able to sell stuff and buy stuff to and from other countries. The United States is a huge farming country. We create a lot of food. We're building Ford F-150s. We build airplanes, military weaponry, technology, music, and movies. We don't want to just sell that stuff to American citizens. We want to sell that stuff to citizens across the globe. So the number two part of foreign policy is to promote, establish, and maintain foreign trade. Number three, we want to promote and advance and encourage world peace. Why? Because we're a bunch of woke, tree-hugging, Birkenstock-wearing hippies who are just all about world peace. Not really. We encourage world peace because we think it's in our country's best interest if the planet is peaceful. If the planet is peaceful, our country is safer. Our citizens are safer. And if the planet is peaceful, we can spend more energy and effort into trade. Buying, selling, and trading things with other countries. Last and certainly not least, we care about advancing democracy through the world. Review, hopefully we know what democracy is, but just not to assume it. Democracy is a system of government where people have the ability to vote. So the United States is a democracy, a specific type of democracy, a republic, which is a representative democracy where we vote for representatives to include a president, but we're a democracy. Great. So the United States thinks democracy is the best form of government, so we try to advertise and try to get other countries to think about democracy. Why does America like democracy? Well, not just because it works for us, which I hope we can say it does. America is convinced that democratic countries are peaceful. Democracies don't tend to have wars with other democracies. We think democracies make good and valuable trading partners. They typically follow the rule of law. Democracies typically protect the rights of their own people and other people. So that fourth and final U.S. foreign policy thing is that we do advance democracy throughout the world. No matter how intelligent and talented the president is, you need a staff to help you out. Foreign policy is huge and complex. Yes, we are talking about how the United States is going to relate, interact with 195 other countries on planet Earth. So the president is going to have help. The Secretary of State and the State Department are the president's number one group that work on foreign policy. That's the State Department's job, working with other countries. All the ambassadors, embassies, and diplomats work for the State Department. Missed there up there, but we can't forget Department of Defense. The military is going to be one of the president's final tools of foreign policy, So the Department of Defense, which owns the United States military, is going to be part of the president's foreign policy team. Also, we have on there the country's spy or intelligence organizations. ODNI and the Central Intelligence Agency, they assist the president making foreign policy decisions. How? These agencies gather intelligence, gather information on other countries. The president now has that information to make foreign policy decisions. I hope you'd see how intelligence and spying and getting information on what the Russias, Chinas, Cubas, Vietnams of the world are doing would help influence the president's decisions on how to relate with that country or countries. So the president has a deep foreign policy team to help the president make decisions on foreign policy, then execute those foreign policy decisions in the real world. We've seen this in multiple lessons. That means it's important, and that the folks who've created that curriculum are pointing to you that this is probably important stuff to know for Florida's EOC and, of course, exam. All right. The Constitution gives the power to make a law to Congress. The Constitution gives really the ability to spend money to fund and maintain an Army and a Navy, and implied that means an Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Space Force, to Congress. So Congress has the power to spend that money on the military, to fund it, to maintain it, to support it, and Congress has the power to declare war. That's in the Constitution. Constitution also says it's the president's job to be commander-in-chief, to command these troops, okay? So between the executive and legislative branches, they haven't always gotten on well in where these powers start and stop. You can't really look to the Constitution for more help, because remember, the Constitution's relatively short, 8,000 words, which sounds like a lot, but it's really just covering 4 big sheets of paper. So we've seen over time that the legislative and executive branches have struggled to find out where these boundaries are with regards to war powers. I like the slide. It serves as a good reminder. This is the beginning of World War II, at least for the United States, when the Imperial Japanese Navy attacked our Navy base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And who declares war? That's Congress, legislative branch's power. Political cartoon here featuring Richard Nixon, a kind of political cartoon about how the executive and legislative branches struggle sometimes with war powers. And it's funnier if you could read it yourself. So, of course, this PowerPoint, I would like you to review it. It is on my plan book. As is everything else on our course, it's in plan book. Great. Tools of foreign policy. Among the tools we have for foreign policy, first one up there is treaties. A treaty is just a fancy word for an agreement between 2 or more countries. So when nations sign an agreement, they have now a formal written agreement that could be on a multitude of things. Typical treaties are peace treaties, defense alliances, economic or trade treaties, treaties covering global warming or pollution. It could be potentially anything, but a treaty is a formal arrangement between 2 countries. We've talked about this, and treaties are another example of separation of powers. It's the president, the head of the executive branch, who basically comes up with and makes those treaties happen with another country, but it's going to be the Senate who's going to have to approve that treaty. So it's an example of checks and balances. The president comes up with, signs the treaties, but Senate has to approve that treaty as a check on the power of the presidency. NATO. We're going to see NATO a couple times during this course. Why? Because it's important. It may very well be one of those things you see as a foreign policy question in our EOC. NATO is an acronym. It stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's the United States' most important defense treaty. NATO was started at the end of World War II, and it's a military alliance with the United States and our neighbors to the north, Canada. And today it's expanded to cover pretty much all of Europe. So I think today this number changes because we get more countries join it every day. I think there's the United States and 30 other countries in NATO today. I think NATO's wonderful. It's a very important defense treaty, and the basis of NATO is contained in Article 5. And the short version is an attack on any one NATO country is considered an attack on all. So if anybody attacks a NATO country, they're not fighting by themselves. They're going to have 30 of their best friends coming to help. The only time NATO has been used for a real war is to support our country, the United States. So when the United States was attacked on 9/11, NATO came to assist us. So I have no issue in thinking that NATO is very important and a key to our national security. Another picture, after World War II, the world kind of splits into two halves. You have NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, countries that were either democracies and capitalist market economies or moving towards that, and the Warsaw Pact, which were communist or communist-leaning or sympathized countries. So you have these two basic big defense alliances. You have NATO, a defense alliance with the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, democracies, capitalist countries, versus the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union and its allies and satellites, Poland, East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and others, communist countries, in kind of a struggle called the Cold War, which we'll talk more about later in the year. So, another graphic showing basically the split in the world between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Who wins? NATO wins. By 1989, the Soviet Union, the big country that's the head of the Warsaw Pact, basically crumbles and falls apart. And along with it, they lose their Warsaw Pact allies, many of whom eventually wind up joining NATO. NATO's major job and role through its entire lifetime, to include today, is to protect Western Europe and the United States from the Soviet Union back then and Russia today. I don't know how well this map will show up on your video. Please feel free to take a closer look on the slide presentation, again on Plan Book. This is Afghanistan at about 2010. Why do I bring this map up? This map shows NATO in action. When the United States attacked Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, as a result of the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on the United States on 9/11, 2001, NATO assisted, and it's still there today. So by 2010, what you see in this picture here is the whole country of the whole country of Afghanistan got split into 5 pieces parts. So up in the north, our NATO ally Germany wound up running northern Afghanistan. Out here to the west, Italy ran western Afghanistan. To the south, it bounced back and forth. It was Britain, the United Kingdom from some period of time, and Canada other periods of time. I think the east for the entirety of this operation has been run by the United States, hoorah. And in the middle of the east is the capital of Afghanistan, the city of Kabul, and its outlying regions. And Kabul's been run by different NATO members over time. When I was there, Kabul was run by Turkey. I like this slide because it brings up the point. NATO does help the United States. NATO fought and fights today beside us, shoulder to shoulder, in Afghanistan. When I was in Afghanistan, my deputy, my second in command, Canadian. The guy I worked down here as a liaison officer, he was from the country of Croatia. The guys I worked with downstairs in the building, German. Across from the hall from them, the Italians. Across the hall from them, British guys working there. Across the street, the French. for the test in the EOC, you do need to know NATO, that it's the United States Defense Alliance between US, Canada, and most of Western Europe. As a citizen, you need to know it's our most important defense alliance. And be careful, there's politicians will say that NATO is a bad thing. I'd be skeptical about that, and I'd ask more of that politician why they're saying NATO bad, since it's served us well from 1945, well, close to 1947 to today. Ambassadors, we've talked about ambassadors. They're our country's representatives with other countries. Cool. The other thing you need to know about ambassadors, because whenever we see separation of powers, it's something important, EOC stuff. Ambassadors are appointed by the president but confirmed by the Senate. So there's that two-step process there. The president has that huge job of hiring all these people to run the government and his foreign policy, to include 150 to 190 ambassadors. But while the president appoints those people, they do get a second look and they need to be confirmed by the Senate. Foreign aid. Foreign aid is simply us helping other countries. With what? Could be a variety of things. It could be food, disaster relief, medicine, skilled help like doctors or engineers. It could be with tools, machinery. It can be military weapons and technology. We do foreign aid because we think we benefit from it. We don't do foreign aid because it's nice to do. Yeah, sure, we do some things because we like to be nice people. I think that's important. But that's not really the basis behind it. We do things because we think it helps our country. We expect benefits from foreign aid. The benefits we expect from foreign aid are, foreign aid is designed to create a safer, healthier, more stable world with nations that now we can trade with and maybe make money with, right? So foreign aid is not to be nice. We don't do it to be super woke, crunchy granola, tree-hugging hippies who love peace. Not really. We do foreign aid because we expect to benefit from it. And you will typically, almost any election cycle, hear a federal politician saying foreign aid is bad, we shouldn't spend that money overseas, we should spend it here in the United States. Well, okay, I'll listen to that, but I also know foreign aid is usually the teeniest, tiniest sliver of the federal budget. And for not a lot of money, most political scientists think we gain a lot from that small expenditure of money. That tiny bit of money we spend on foreign aid, we get something back with a more peaceful world filled with people who are more likely to like us than they are to become terrorists and try to kill us. I think they have some pretty convincing arguments that foreign aid really does work out for the best for the United States. Another big part of this chapter, and it's going to be covered in other chapters later down the road, is the big world-changing events that happened after World War II. Great. So World War II is the most destructive war in United States history. Global history. Figures are just tremendously huge. Some people say 60 million people died during World War II. Some have numbers as high as 70 or 80, 85 million human beings died during World War II. Whatever the right number, it's tremendously high number, and huge parts of particularly Europe just get smashed flat, ground to pieces during this terrible, desperate war. 60 million people dead. Well, for those 60 million people dead, you had multiples of that number maimed, wounded, sick, ill. For those 60 million dead, you had multiples of that, now refugees. Because you can't live in this environment where it's smashed flat. You have no water, electricity, food, jobs, entire countries that really don't have a functioning economy anymore. So the United States sees Western Europe smashed flat after World War II, and it says, we have to do something about this. We have to fix this. Again, is it just to be Mr. Nice Guy? No. The United States felt that we needed to help Western Europe fix itself, not just to be a nice guy, sure, it has that aspect, but we wanted Western Europe to be rebuilt so they're strong enough to defend themselves against communism in the Soviet Union, which is the new big threat to Europe, and to become rich, wealthy, stable democracies that we could trade with, buy stuff from, and sell stuff to. We have companies that want to make refrigerators and cars and airplanes and food and TV sets now that the war's over. Well, we need markets to sell this stuff to. So we want Western Europe, which was smashed flat, to be strong enough to resist incursions from the communist Soviet Union, and also strong enough to become decent trading partners and markets for our goods after World War II. So we see the world, and particularly here focused in Europe, split in half. The blue on the map is Western Europe, which become members of NATO and which receive foreign aid from the United States in something we're going to call the Marshall Plan. The country in red are the Soviet Union, call it Russia today, and the Soviet Union satellite countries and allies of the Warsaw Pact. Bluntly, countries that the Soviet Union invaded to fight Nazi Germany during the end of World War II. So starting in the 1945, there's a new world order. The world's basically split in half between communist Soviet Union and Western Europe and the United States. Some propaganda pictures, anti-communist propaganda. The United States really did, Western Europe really did see communism in the Soviet Union being the next big threat. Remember what propaganda is. Propaganda is media material with a message that's typically designed to get you to think or believe, think a certain thing, believe a certain thing, or to feel and act a certain way. And if you see this propaganda, I think it's pretty clear the message. Communism is scary. Communism is frightening. Communism is the enemy. And we need to protect ourselves, and not only ourselves, the rest of Europe and rest of the world against communism. So we see this split between a democratic, capitalist, Western Europe, the United States and Canada, protected by the NATO alliance, going against communist dictatorships of Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And the other piece of this is going to be something called the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was a $13 billion foreign aid package to Western Europe to rebuild Western Europe after it has been smashed flat by the horrors of World War II. In this chapter, we just see the Marshall Plan as an example of foreign aid. And the question will be something like, what was the deal with the Marshall Plan? And you're going to say it was foreign aid to rebuild Western Europe after World War II. But in chapters down the road, you're going to have to appreciate this idea of the bigger global split and the Cold War between the West, United States, NATO, Marshall Plan countries, versus the East, communist Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And like I said, spoiler alert, the good guys, the United States and Western Europe, will win this Cold War. Soviet Union kind of just breaks apart internally, shatters. Big pieces, parts of the Soviet Union become independent and then become in NATO. For example, once upon a time, all these countries were part of the Soviet Union, now are independent, and a lot of which have joined NATO. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, all were once upon a time part of the Soviet Union. And after the Soviet Union falls apart in 1989, they start splitting off, becoming their own independent nations. Much like once upon a time we split away from Great Britain. Cool. More propaganda. I like propaganda. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting way to put yourself into the history of the time. And also, propaganda is often an EOC question. Again, propaganda is information or media designed to get you to think a certain way or believe a certain thing or act a certain way. Here we have pro-Marshall Plan propaganda. We got some German. This says Marshall Plan helps Europe. We got some French. Marshall Plan, the cement of Europe. You see a lot of American symbology in there. You see Uncle Sam. You see the Statue of Liberty. Even Europeans would readily recognize this as symbols for America. Then you got the red, white, and blue on there. The Europeans know that too. It's symbology for the America. So it acts as propaganda, letting these European nations know that the United States is there to help them rebuild their countries. So these nations are favorably disposed. They like America. Good stuff. Another part of the EOC is political cartoons. You got to understand them, and they can be tricky. I get it. So what you do on a political cartoon is you look in there and just figure out what you're seeing. You're going to see lots of symbolism. You're going to see irony. You got to look for the context. You look for any kind of labeling is in there, okay? This one on the left is a little easier to understand. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. How can you tell it's him? Well, if you ever seen him, the mustache is a giveaway. And then on his back, you see the hammer and sickle, which is basically the Soviet version of a eagle and the American flag. It represents Soviet Union and typically also communism. Here, Stalin is trying to stop a basketball labeled with the Marshall Plan going into a net of European recovery. Yeah, that one I think is pretty obvious, that Communist Soviet Union is trying to prevent the United States from helping Europe using the Marshall Plan. This one here is a little trickier. Clearly, this is supposed to be the Statue of Liberty, holding a bag of money instead of the torch she holds, right? The face, you have probably no idea. You'd have to see a picture of George Marshall, the author of the Marshall Plan, to appreciate this. And what are all these people doing here? The short version of this cartoon is this is a cartoon that probably came from the Soviet Union, and it's probably saying something like this. The Marshall Plan, it's that typical American thing. Americans use their money to get their way. All they care about is money. And sure, America will give you money as long as you basically become America's slaves, bow down to them, kiss America's feet. So this is a Russian Soviet propaganda cartoon geared towards Western Europe saying, not so fast. Think before you take that money from the United States, because the United States is going to expect something back. The United States is going to expect you to kiss their feet for the foreign aid they give you. Speaking of money and trade, that is going to be another tool of foreign policy. Before the president uses that hammer of military force, and after the president works his or her way through things like using ambassadors and treaties and foreign aid, we could use money and business as a punishment or a motivator to other countries. You could have trade sanctions, which is where you basically say, I'm not going to sell stuff to you because I don't like your country's behavior. If you're going to train terrorists, if you're going to export illegal narcotics, if you're going to smuggle humans, do human trafficking, we think that's a bad thing, so the way we're going to punish you is not immediately drop bombs on you. No. we may punish you by trade sanctions. So, those cool F-150s you want, those American movies, music, materiel, food, well, we're going to put sanctions on that. We're not going to sell that to you, so you and your people won't have it as a punishment because we don't like your country's behavior. An embargo is a sanction on steroids. An embargo is basically many nations get together and all agree to put sanctions on a country. These happen a lot, sanctions and embargoes. The slide here, one country that's constantly under trade sanctions and embargoes from most of the world is North Korea. Why? Because they're a terrible dictatorship who violates a lot of the international norms, all right? So you're constantly going to see or hear countries having trade sanctions or embargoes with North Korea. And embargoes need military force to back them up. Trade sanctions require military force to back them up. And a lot of times it's going to be done by my favorite, the United States Navy. Why? Because we operate globally and we operate at sea, which is where most of the trade is going to happen, right? So top left, you see the United States Navy stopping a Soviet ship that's trying to get military equipment into the country of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which you will learn about in history class, all right? Example of embargoes and sanctions. Navy, you got the hard way to get on a ship, which is climb up the side of it, and oh yeah, not only are you heavy, but you also get 60 pounds of equipment on you. Or maybe the easier way to get on a ship, using gravity, fast roping from a helicopter. So we have these economic tools. We could use our trade as a foreign policy tool. How? Trade sanctions, embargoes. Do they have to be enforced? Sure. So the Navy will be out there making sure people are filing the sanctions and the embargoes. Getting close to the end, the final tool the president has as commander-in-chief in foreign policy is military force. Yes, it can't come down to that. And hopefully our presidents take this very seriously, because when you are using military force, you're killing human beings and putting our own soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines' lives at risk. So we hope our presidents take their role as commander-in-chief seriously. But you do have military force as that last option in foreign policy. This is a real quick, short Afghanistan slide. Hopefully you do realize we invaded the country of Afghanistan 2001, early 2002, after the CIA found out that the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization led by Osama bin Laden was training and operating and basically based in the country of Afghanistan. President at the time calls up the president of Afghanistan and says, hey, give me these bad guys. They killed 3,000 Americans on 9/11. President of Afghanistan said, nope, I can't do that. These are not only our allies, but we are pledged to take care of them, so we can't give them up. So that probably wasn't the best call, because the United States did invade Afghanistan, crush its government and its military, and take the place over to try to hunt down these terrorists. Now, we're still there today. It's 2021. Don't know when you're seeing this video, but we basically invade Afghanistan 2001 going into 2002 to chase down these terrorists of Al-Qaeda and their leader Osama bin Laden. Of course, hopefully, famously, you know, in about 2011 under President Obama, yes, Navy SEAL Team 6 found from the CIA where Osama bin Laden is hiding. SEAL Team 6 flies in there on Secret Squirrel helicopters, shoot the man in the face, throw his body in a bag, take that bag back to a U.S. military base. CIA doctors identified the remains using, I'm sure, photographic, dental, and DNA information. Yep, we did it. We killed Osama bin Laden, architect of 9/11, man who attacked our country using terrorists, killed 3,000 Americans. Just in that attack, he's killed Americans in other terrorist attacks too. And that was the end of Osama bin Laden, But that was not the end of our military operation in Afghanistan. Like I said, it's still going on today. 20 years from the beginning, and still like 10 years after Osama bin Laden was killed by the United States military. Military force, also a great example in current history, was in the country of Iraq. As another part of this attack on the United States on September 11, 2001, the CIA started to tell President Bush that, hey, we have to worry about the country of Iraq also. It's a country that doesn't like us. It's led by this horrible dictator named Saddam Hussein, who we fought a war with before in 1991, and who tried to assassinate the president, George H.W. Bush, who, by the way, is your dad. So Iraq is definitely the bad guys. The CIA convinces the president that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. What is a weapon of mass destruction? Kind of what it sounds like. A nuclear weapon, radiological weapon, chemical or biological weapons. Any kind of weapon that creates mass casualties, weapon of mass destruction. So the CIA gave the president a scenario of what happens if Saddam Hussein of Iraq gives Al-Qaeda a weapon of mass destruction. And I'm sure they told President Bush, Mr. President, 9/11 was horrible. We had 3,000 dead Americans. Now somebody gets a nuclear weapon into the United States and you're talking 30,000 dead Americans. 300,000 dead Americans. Who could tell? So the President of the United States gets a hold of Saddam Hussein, says, hey, buddy, you got to get out of your country and give us all your weapons of mass destruction or we're going to come get them. Saddam Hussein thought we were bluffing, thought we'd never do it. He was wrong. We did. We took over their country. We break their military really in 2 weeks. You could say as quick as 1 week. We toppled the government. Saddam Hussein has to run for the hills, which he does. So we have functionally taken over the country of Iraq, destroyed its army and its government. Do we catch up with Saddam Hussein? We do. We find him hiding in a hole in the ground in a farm, give him back to the Iraqi people who put him on trial. He's found guilty and he was executed by hanging. So that's the end of Saddam Hussein. And you've had my class earlier in this year because we discussed this multiple times. We invade Iraq, we take it over. It's kind of ours now. First thing we do is look for those weapons of mass destruction and whoops, they're not there. So a case where the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, used that military power for foreign policy and really for what is our number one foreign policy goal? National security. He uses that military to destroy another country's army and government, to take it over, and it turns out in a terrible situation, terribly ironic situation, we invaded a country and took it over for weapons of mass destruction that weren't there. So that's it for Chapter 8, Lesson 3, Foreign Policy. It's kind of an important chapter, and we're going to see at least 2 more chapters related to this at the end of the course. And all that material is pretty rich stuff for the end of course exam. That's happening quickly, at least when I'm shooting it year 2021. It's coming on May 7th, and that's going to be here like that. So keep up with your work, get ready to study, and we'll all do well on the EOC. Thanks, Hobbs Middle School Civics.